Hi, my name is Susan. I just thought I'd carry on the series what I'm doing about meaningless sex and relationships that lead nowhere, that are not Christian based, and the sort of residue it can leave you with. And I just thought I'd go and talk about my experiences. Boyfriend number 6, which is following on from the last one. Eventually I met somebody on a dating site who I knew for 6 years. On our first date I was insulted about my weight. I should have walked them, but I carried on dating him. First year was sweet, and I was his first and he was a virgin, and was nervous and shaky on his first time with me. He would come down to see me every 2 weeks, and after about a year it switched to me commuting up to his home, which is about 200 miles on a coach. When I would visit after 3 to 5 hours on a coach, it would be great for a couple of days, and then I would be left downstairs whilst he played on his computer games all day long. But his sweet little cat used to keep me company, but I used to feel hurt that he was always on that computer, on the games. He would have constant dissatisfaction with my weight and embarrass me about how I shouldn't be eating food I'd paid for at a restaurant for both of us. He'd get ideas about making me live off soup, a tin of soup, just to get my weight down, but it was always on his terms, and he just thought it would be good for me to lose weight, but he held the reins for actually feeding me the soup. So I used to often go out and get some food of my own. He would like that control. He would have digs at me for how I ate, if I ate fast or slurped or anything. He would insult me during sex, and he was disgusted at the size of my ass, which hurt. He would make me wait at the station whilst taking ages to collect me. He would take me out to a pub occasionally and would wanted to only afford a Coke, and would reluctantly get me a Bacardi, which was what I wanted, as he used to get dirty looks off other people, the customers, because they could overhear the way he was treating me. I was just out of university and he was in a manual labour job, but he managed with all the personal nitpicking to make me feel smaller and smaller each day. I was more ahead musically and he couldn't even play a chord, and would bash drums all over me if I played guitar with him, and was just as awkward as possible, disruptive, and would be smirking all the way through. I was a bit dumbstruck as to why he would behave like that, but still carried on. He would often ask me to move in on honeymoon periods where things were good between us, but I couldn't find a job up there, and I would not move because I felt it didn't feel very secure. My mum always says, better to get married before handing your keys in, and it was such a long way from home, like 200 miles, so I was completely dependent on him then. So it was constant up and downs because we would clash over this. The times I would soften, and was on the verge of making a move and packing up my stuff after being talked into moving in with him. He'd pull out at the last minute, so I felt like I was in mid-air, not knowing where my home was. I'd sell a lot of stuff to get ready, and then it wouldn't happen. Eventually he asked me to marry him, and he changed his mind the next day after we got the ring, which I paid for in the end because he never picked it up. He joked saying you're the only girl to pay for her own ring, and laughed, and that hit me badly, and I cried and cried for 3 days non-stop, where I didn't see anybody during that time. My drunk neighbour upstairs asked my mum if I was alright because he must have heard me crying all night. Like a lunatic, I went back again and forgave him, and proceeded to be mentally reduced over and over again. Eventually I split with him after finding out about him having a few girls on Messenger, where after I found out, I wanted to set his house on fire, but I was just really feeling in a rage with all these girls, and his cat come to the rescue, and I thought I better not set his house on fire then, and I just left and pushed his keys through the letterbox. I went through a period of almost sending me round the twist, because I split up with him after that point. I attended a church where I was cracking up at the altar, taking communion at Easter with tears running down my face in desperation over the pain I was in. But it took me about 6 months to get all back on my feet again, and I was feeling good and looking towards other guys that were quite nice that were around. But after then, his sister turned up in an email, and she says that he was down and wanted me to contact him to just say hello, to ask him if he was okay. But one thing led to another, and he was back on the scene again. I fell under his spell, and we had unprotected sex where I became pregnant. He dropped the bomb afterwards, saying that he just wanted to be friends with benefits, as it was going nowhere between us, and I was hurt yet again. Because I loved him, I did everything I could to be the other woman and try and bend my mind around the fact that he was seeing other people, because I was still in love with him. And I was all confused as well, because I was having a child by him as well, but I just couldn't do it. Something in my soul was screaming, like couldn't take the fact of being another person that was on the scene. Getting pregnant, he didn't take the news of pregnancy well. He wanted me to have an abortion just like his mum did. What was good enough for her was good enough for me. I was a bit shocked that I was pregnant, as I was told I couldn't have any children due to my diagnosis of PCOS. I spent 9 months alone in my flat with occasional visits from my family, and had to manage on my own through all those trimesters of feeling sick and stuff. I was fairly optimistic that he would come round eventually after deciding to keep the baby with my mum's and brother's help. He came to one scan with me, and suddenly the reality hit him. There was me elated at seeing my child move on the screen, and there was him crying for himself because he was worried he couldn't afford it. When it was closer to going to hospital to have her, he said he would be bored, and if he had to sit in my place on his own waiting for her to be born. So I was pretty hurt at that comment, because he was quite selfish. It wasn't about him, it was about the child and the support to us, but he couldn't even give us that. So I didn't invite him to the birth, my daughter's birth. I was put in a side room and given an induced injection, as I was planned to have an emergency C-section due to my diabetes. I used to have to inject myself at the top of my leg during my pregnancy, probably about 3 times a day. I was made to walk around the hospital with my mum whilst the injection took effect, and it ached so bad. When I got back to the side ward, I could hear other women in the private room screaming in pain, and it sounded like a pig slaughterhouse, so that was quite a shock. They never tell you the harsh side of having children and stuff. That's kept secret. Eventually I was put in a private room with my mum, and I was having needles in my stomach and drips in my hand, and one nurse just kept putting the drip in over and over again, and she claimed she was looking for a vein. It was sore, and I thought, if Jesus can do it, so can I. I was in 16 hours of labour with my daughter, and she was in distress. The nurses hardly came in to check on me. My mum was so worried. I had morphine, which just made me sleepy, but the gas and air was good, as it was like being hit with 1,000 lagers in 5 minutes. But the pain was still there. I didn't dilate properly, so my mum called the nurses again, and I had an emergency C-section earlier the next day. So eventually I was wheeled in for an emergency C-section. I was so grateful for my mum to be there. I was on the verge of having a panic attack. I had a giant needle put in my back. My mum came in dressed up in a green overall, which looks like nursing staff. She held my hand and was shaking. I was shaking like a leaf. She calmed me down, but I was fully awake. But my stomach was froze, and I could see my stomach being cut in the mosaic mirror above me, which I asked to be hidden from view. One of the doctors were walking around asking me questions to get my mind off having the panic attack. So I was walking around the room back and forth, asking me questions about Lola, asking me questions about my daughter. It actually worked, that did. It kept my mind off the problem. I was being pulled around the operating table whilst I felt that they were ripping and cutting the muscles in my stomach to get my daughter out. Back and forth I was going, being tossed back and forth. Eventually my daughter was brought to me, and she looked like a Muse fan with high black spiky hair and blue eyes. She was blinking at the light, looking totally unimpressed. I was desperately trying to lift myself up to hold her, but my body weighed so heavy I was struggling, but I felt incredibly proud of her. I phoned her father up from the hospital bed and told him I had her, and he said that he'd been phoning all the hospitals to see where I was. I didn't believe him, as he knew where I was because I told him before, but he weren't going to come anyway. Then he proceeded to go on about supporting a drunk woman he had met, and says he was with her. I says that I could have done with your support, and that was that. And then it felt like a giant kipper hit me in the face, and I just suddenly realised that he didn't give a toss about me or the child, and it took that long for the penny to drop with me, because I was quite forgiving and soft, and didn't really realise it until something dramatic happened that he just didn't care deep down. I wasn't the only one on the ward to be on their own with a child. All but one bed was occupied by single mothers. There was mostly white girls and one white girl that was of mixed race, who didn't have much dignity, as a naked bottom was sticking out on top of the bed with no curtains drawn. And there was one Asian family that was around the bed, and they was looking across at all the single mothers, looking really sorry for us, because they was making such a fuss as this one woman that had just had a child. After the operation I was completely doolally, but I managed to get up and get my own dinner myself, and to all the nurses' amazement, a couple of hours after my C-section, they said that this was next to impossible after a C-section because of the swelling, but I managed to do it. I wanted to have a shower so badly, and I was bleeding onto a large pad. I managed to wheel my drip into the shower, and it fell out onto the floor, and I was amazed at all the blood that was pumping out in sync with my heartbeat all over the floor, but still looking dazed at it, but somehow it stopped. And I got back to the ward and discovered that my pain medication had been stolen off my bedside tray. Then later the pain from the C-section set in, and it really hurt. Luckily my genius mum had packed some paracetamol, which took off the edge, as the nurses wouldn't supply me with any more medication. So I eventually left hospital with my daughter. My legs were swollen with water and very heavy. My mum and brother came with me, and I got my daughter home and tried to give her a bath. My daughter drowned all three of us, and she screamed the house down. Suddenly reality hit of how hard this new journey was going to be for us all. Postnatal depression. I had postnatal depression after my daughter was born. I think because of all the trauma previously, my hormones were all crazy, and it was full on pressure. It was full on pressure with the new baby. I had a very bad self-image. I felt like a false version of a woman, almost like a transvestite, or even an imposter of a transvestite. It was really weird. I wanted to rip out my womb and set it on fire and stamp all over it. I had full-on hate for men. I had no love for myself, and I felt completely asexual for quite a long time. I was permanently angry all the time. My brother stayed out the way but helped where he could with my daughter. I found it difficult to spend time loving my daughter, as she was very fussy and would have a lot of trouble settling, which isolated me even more as a mother, because whatever I did, it was wrong. I even so I kept her clean. She wanted for nothing. I found out later that she had autism, but I always knew something wasn't quite right with her. I would sleep with her in a blanket tucked underneath me all night, and she would scream, and she would look at me so hateful. It looked demonic sometimes, but I did love her. But it was just very difficult time to bond. It took quite a long time to bond with my daughter. The ex saw our daughter after, and then again 10 months later I stupidly slept with him again, and this time I felt terrible because I defiled myself again, and I felt sick with myself because I fell for it again. Something in my soul broke this time, and I couldn't crucify myself any longer. Maybe it was all the trauma of childbirth that finally made me grow up and see the reality of the situation between me and him. He would email me again and again, always around public holidays, asking if my daughter was okay, trying to get a hook in to come down and use me again. I just told him to put it in the blender, as I didn't want it anywhere near me again. I haven't spoken to him in years. So the biggest mistakes I made was being too trusting with men. I gave myself away too soon. They didn't provide any home phone numbers or anything that was personal to them. They always kept me hidden. Not being taken out in public, not giving myself a period of time to check them out, on dating especially, not being equally yoked, not seeing things in an equal, respectful way towards each other, or like under the banner of Christianity or anything that was proven in that way. Being taken advantage of, being manipulated, being insulted, staying when they were clearly no good, not seeing things how they really were, handing over my power to them, being disrespected, not being supported, constantly being hurt, playing on my insecurities, being constantly available to be used. So the red flags. I was on my own 13 years up to this current day. I tried a few dating sites here and there, but it felt like a meat market with being asked about my bra size and other personal information, and it just didn't feel right. And I wanted to protect my daughter as well from the influence of a potential bad relationship she could witness, and all the possible emotional ups and downs. I resigned myself to not bothering and waiting to die, so I'd actually given up on the idea of having a relationship with anyone. I tried Christian dating sites, but they were non-starters, and churches were there, but there was nobody my age, so I was quite isolated. But the one thing I did know after what I went through is never to go through any of those experiences ever again, because it was very damaging. In this journey I'm going through with my kingdom partner, there are many similarities. He was and is currently a player with his past and present lovers. From over a couple of years ago, I have spiritually been linked to him, as I says in my earlier videos. In this journey I'm going through with my kingdom partner, there are many similarities. He was and currently is a player with his past and present lovers. From over a couple of years ago, I have been spiritually linked to him, feeling his heart, mind, hearing his voice and feeling him sexually. He can see and hear my world through my eyes. He can feel my body. He can see me naked. I'm aware of some of the antics he has got up to with men and women, and have been made aware with visions, lyrics and songs and confirmations. Through his own admission, he has recently been in my region relating to his work, and he has had women on one night stands, which hurt really bad because I can feel, and he's told me stuff. He was mocking the promise because he has been held in the helm twice over, once by himself and been pulled back in with me, but he has done all he can do to get me out of this helm situation, which is like this demonic thing that's attacking us, and still is. He says he wants to push his luck in regards to what God is up to under this thing of grace. He thinks it's hilarious that he can get away with so much. To me, why would God put me with a kingdom spouse who does this when I can feel him? When I've preserved myself and kept myself away from men like this, it is truly painful to be aware. The idea of him getting intimate with other women really drives me crazy with rage, and he feels my anger and said that he enjoys feeling my pain because it boosts his ego that I'll get so jealous. But at the same time, he wants to be honest with me that he isn't ready and he isn't going to give up having endeavours with these women anytime soon. He feels that he loves me and believes in the promise, but it's the future, in the future, and says he needs to be touched by women all the time as it soothes him. And it's easy because women approach him all the time in relation to his work, and it has a lot to do with his messed up past. Now I have to distance myself mentally just to get on with my day and just trust in God that he's still working on him, and swallow my pride and feel him ejaculate for someone else. I have strong feelings for this man I cannot remove, and have stopped making love to him in the helm, or even letting him see or touch my body, so as to hold on to the last piece of dignity I have left. Please think twice before sleeping with anyone, as you create soul ties and it will haunt you for the rest of your life. And as you've heard in my story, it's left a massive mess, and you're left holding the baby, and you really got to be smart from the off. And I think it's the structure of a Christian marriage is the best thing because it's ultimately respectful on both sides. Particularly if you are a believer, you cannot compromise yourself in Christ, as you writhe like I did, and it will create a lot of damage, and it will be impossible to undo by yourself. God has joined me to a wolf and him to a lamb to bring about understanding on both sides, to break down our defences in the wilderness, and to force us to work together under extreme crushing mentally and physically, to bring about a marriage based on a solid ground. And that's it. That's all I've got to say, so just think twice, because it really ain't worth it. Make sure that you check the person out, and don't give your goods away too soon. God bless.